Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to what is really the last session in quite a marathon of events and films that have been running over the last 2 days as part of Housing Europe Annual Conference. Um, and for those of you who've managed to catch some of the movies and are also here, we're really happy to see you and hope you've gotten something out of those movies. So I'm very happy to just give you a little bit of a background into why we wanted to cover this topic of homes after COVID, uniting, connected, affordable. And it was really, in a way, to think about the growing divisions that we see and which the COVID pandemic has shed an even stronger light on. So that's divisions between different groups in our society, as some people could continue working, others couldn't. So there's a real bigger disparity in terms of income. Inequalities also between generations, where we all know people who have been, particularly elderly people, who've been really isolated over this period and lonely. So we can really only expect those inequalities, unfortunately, to grow as now we talk about this race for space, as people who can move to bigger homes to work from home are going to do that while others don't. And we also are going to see one of the most shocking inequalities that we can see, and that is a growth in homelessness, and that is going to be difficult to avoid. So as a result of the end of the support payments. So as we are seeing and we are reading every day about these growing inequalities, what we wanted to do is bring a panel of people together who are really working in the opposite direction in different capacities, and see how can we really bring those forces of good in a way together in the housing sphere to actually work in the opposite direction and push for a more inclusive societies, whether that's between generations and between different groups in society. So who do we have with us today? It's really great to see. I've met some of you in person before and hope to do so again at some point. We're really happy to be joined by Josh Kurtz. So Josh, the last time we met was at the International Social Housing Festival in Lyon. It was a fantastic 3-day event full of events celebrating what works well in social housing in Lyon. And you're now the assistant director at Washington County in Oregon. So you're joining us from the other side of the world and a different time zone as well. So thanks for making that effort. And then also Jarmo Linden. It's also been a while since we've met in person. And you're in Finland, so not that far away, the Director of Housing, Finance and Development Center of Finland. So you're the body responsible for, let's say, leading the policy development in housing and funding those social housing projects in Finland. So also great support. And also, obviously, you're working on the build-up to the next international festival due to take place in Helsinki next June, hopefully.
Hope so.
COVID permitting. Great. And then we have David Sim, Creative Director at Gale, Urban Research and Design Consultancy firm in Denmark. Brilliant to have you on board. David, I know that you've written a lot on this topic of more people-friendly cities. So I'm really looking forward to getting your perspective on how we can tap into all that knowledge to avoid this. Yeah, thanks. And Janek Tarkowski, a director of the film that's actually just wrapped up. It was the last film of the 18 films, and we showed over the 2 days. Thanks a lot for joining us, Janek, and especially for contributing yet again your film to this to the social housing, European social housing community. It's the second time because we saw it together in Lyon live at the last festival. So we also have, coming from Denmark, our colleague from BL, so that's the National Federation representing social housing bodies in Denmark. You're in charge of strategic development and cooperation at that National Federation, Rika, and you're going to tell us a bit later on about, indeed, the efforts to tackle this issue of loneliness. So great. Thanks a lot again for being there. And I'm going to hand over the floor to my colleague, Julien, the Director of Policy at Housing Europe, to kick off the conversation with you guys.
Thank you very much, Sorka. And indeed, a great way to conclude the Social Housing Festival is to think about the post-COVID world in which affordable housing will have a key role to play, and which we decided to pick up three elements in this context. Indeed, we say the element of unity, the element of connectivity or connection, and the element of affordability. And so we want to kickstart the conversation with all the great panelists, with Josh. Again, thank you very much for joining us so early for you. And Josh, so you have a background in affordable housing development and implementation, and you have this great and unique experience of having seen the two sides of the Atlantic in terms of housing policy. So the question we'd like to ask you today is to start by explaining briefly what is the housing policy at the moment in the US, and to which extent the government in the US will want to overcome the COVID crisis using housing policy as a recovery tool. And then after that, to reflect on, in a way, comparing the different situation in both sides of the Atlantic, in particular, looking at what are the needs, what is the context and the challenges that housing providers are facing in the US, and reflecting on to which extent it differs or it converges with what we see in Europe. So. Thanks, Josh, again, and the floor is yours.
Well, good morning from Portland. Good evening on your side of the pond. It's so great to be back with everybody and see some familiar faces. So I'm excited to be here. So I'll kind of quickly just touch on some of the first points that you brought up, and I appreciate that question. So on the housing policy side, the last 4 years under the Trump administration, there were a lot of threats of major budget cuts to affordable housing programs, to homeless programs. So it's kind of the dawn of a new day, I would say, under the Biden administration. He seems very committed to social housing and homelessness post-COVID. And he seems to right now have a three-tier approach to social housing and homelessness. So what we're seeing first was the American Rescue Act, which was a bill that came out of Congress that was really driven by the Biden administration. So we saw $274 billion allocated to renters who lost income because of COVID, $5 billion in emergency rental vouchers. And again, that's the largest allocation of new vouchers in the US in decades. And if you're not quite sure of what the voucher program, that really is the largest social housing program in the United States. It operates a lot like Germany's Wohngeld program, if you're familiar with that. In addition to that, $5 billion were allocated for homeless assistance for those sleeping rough or at risk of falling into homelessness. An additional $10 billion is being set aside to assist homeowners at risk of losing their housing. And then another $5 billion to just help folks with utility bills who are having a hard time paying it. The second and perhaps even more interesting thing is, as we get into our fiscal year budget 2022, we're seeing that the Biden administration is asking for a 15% increase in funding for social housing and homeless programs. Again, this would be pretty historic. We haven't seen a budget increase of that size in decades. Again, we'll see if Congress can get it through. But if that happens, that's going to be a major game changer for our programs. And then just lastly, on the policy side, there's a proposed infrastructure bill that the Biden administration has been put forward. And again, it's hung up in Congress right now, but if approved, it would be major investments in repairing and improving the energy efficiency of our hard social housing units that have really deteriorated across the country. And that's an estimated $40 billion would be included to improve our social housing stock. There are also plans to add 500,000 new affordable housing units for low and middle income buyers. So investment-wise, I think coming post-COVID, we're seeing a lot of energy being put on social housing. We're seeing a lot of advocacy put on it, and I'm kind of heartened by what we're seeing. as we talk about inequities in housing, I think that's something that the Biden administration is also putting a lot more attention on right now. And so, every state in the United States is so different. I just cannot emphasize that. I'm sure many of you have traveled, but what goes in Texas is not the same in Oregon. What happens in California, well, that's a lot different than what maybe the state of Alabama will do. So I think Biden's housing team understands that communities of color have not been treated equally in our housing and homeless systems in the United States. That often have not accumulated the wealth that comes with home ownership, which is, obviously in the United States is a much larger form of wealth accumulation. In addition, we see more communities of color have fallen into homelessness at a rate much higher than white families in the United States. So the bottom line is that our housing system has not been equitable, and major changes need to be made. And there seems to be more of a commitment from the Biden administration, but again, we have a long ways to go. On the issue of just the what we're seeing over here in the United States versus some of the things that I've seen in Europe over the years, and again, things have changed so much in the last couple of years. So I look forward to getting back over to Europe and meeting with some of my colleagues. But I live on the West Coast of the United States, and I would say the issue of the day right now is just homelessness. I live in the Portland, Oregon area, and we have one of the worst homeless issues in the entire country. You cannot go on any street corner, you can't drive on any highway without seeing very large homeless encampments everywhere. I think at last count, we have more than 5,000 people just in our region alone sleeping rough on the street. So it's really one of the worst in the country, right up there with Los Angeles. And so one of the things that we've seen, especially as we talk about healthcare and how important that is to improving housing conditions and the social determinants of health, is really working with our healthcare industry and partnering to ensure folks have the right services. So we understand that folks who are sleeping rough, there's a wide range of reasons why that's happening. So ensuring that we have the right behavioral health services, substance use, alcohol services, and then all the physical health partnerships that need to kind of come into alignment for all these folks. And again, I spoke about the inequities in our system and what we've seen in Portland, throughout the West Coast and throughout the country, is that communities of color are overrepresented in our homeless populations. We see that really strongly here in the Portland metro region and the state of Oregon. So we are really trying to work with culturally specific providers who can meet the needs of our homeless population where they are, and then engage them into our healthcare system. And it's when I compare that issue with what I saw living in Europe, Europe's just so different. Every European country is so different. I had the chance to spend a lot of time in Germany, a lot of time in the Netherlands, a little bit of time in Estonia and Portugal. And when I look at the social housing situations and I look at the homeless systems, every country is so different. It's really hard to build any type of consensus to say this is the European social housing system or this is the European homeless system, right? So I think every country just handles things so differently. But I would say, when I look at the homeless situation in the United States, it's much worse than anything I've seen in other European countries. So as we kind of move forward and we look at, what do post-COVID homes look like in the United States? What needs to be done? I think three things come top of mind. First is that equity factor. It's really hard to focus on other areas when there's so many inequities in our system, and when communities of color historically not had access to levels of home ownership and face discrimination in our housing and homeless systems. So I think that's first and foremost, and that's something that really the work has to be intentional. The second thing that I'd really hit on is just the commitment to rehabbing and equipping our social housing post-COVID-19. So much of our existing housing is really in bad condition right now. It's not energy efficient, and these issues have really been exacerbated over the last 15 to 16 months, right? So if we don't invest into our current housing stock, we're going to lose so much and continue to operate extremely low efficiency social housing. And then I had the opportunity just prior coming into this meeting to talk a little bit and hear about connectivity. And that's so big. I think location and connectivity are so important. we've all experienced different levels of disconnection from people over the last year, and where we live, that's so important, right? And so as we cite new social housing and affordable housing projects across the country, ensuring they're in spaces that are really connected to the community is going to be important. It costs more, yeah, but we need easy access to, people need easy access to jobs, to stores, to activities, and to opportunities. So again, buying land in these areas can be really expensive, but the risk of not doing so is continued isolation and loss of opportunity for people to have that connection factor. So I've said a lot here in the last several minutes, so I'm going to pause and kick it back over to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Indeed, it's very interesting. And what you just described, I mean, the three factors of equity, quality, and connectivity against isolation, it's very much something like we can see as also the challenges in the European context. So we'll come back to you, Josh, at the end for the Q&A. Obviously, I'm sure we will have questions to you. But now we'll move it back to Europe, indeed, with Jarmo Linden from ARA, so the Finnish Finnish Finance Housing Agency. Jarmo, we've just heard from Josh a series of challenges related to indeed affordability, to connectivity, to equity in the communities. And we know that Finland has not only a reputation, but a very good record in having a strong innovation in terms of welfare state on the one hand, but connectivity on the other hand. We heard also that Finland has the ambition to make working from home possible for everyone as part of the new world after COVID. What does that mean for public housing, for social housing? Because we certainly see the interest, but we also see the challenges from the point of view of affordability. And we also see the challenges of having this aspiration for a home with a garden in the nature, and while we also want to avoid to have urban sprawl. So what would be your point of view about those maybe contradictory challenges, sometimes the kind of solution that we can bring forward? Jarmo, over to you.
Yeah, very difficult questions. Here in Europe, of course, as Josh said, we have very different systems, and every country has its own history and bad dependency. Even with the Nordic countries, there are huge differences in how the housing system is based on. But I think we have in Finland, for instance, the government housing policies are still quite strong, and they are still strong on the supply side, that we can support and subsidize social and affordable housing production. And that is done in cooperation with the municipalities, because the land use and the local housing policies, that's very important. The municipalities, they own most part of the social rentals housing in Finland, and they are our most important clients. For instance, the city of Helsinki, our capital, it owns most part of the land area, so it has almost a monopoly giving out the new building sites, and they can do that with lower price than on the market. That's the way to build up mixed new housing areas. The idea of social mix, that there are different type of tenure in every new housing area. Of course, we try to combat segregation, but if you have already segregated areas afterwards, it's very difficult to balance it because of the NIMBY and things like that. So it's better way to build the social mix principle in the housing construction. But that was possible in Finland because we are a latecomer in urbanizations. In most of the housing is built during the last 50 years. So there has been a strong public intervention in how these housing areas has been built up. But the actual question, what is the impact of this pandemic? Actually, at the moment, there hasn't been any serious problems on housing market at all. There hasn't been. People can continue to live, no more evictions, no more homelessness or things like that. But of course, is it possible to make your work from your home? No, practically it's not possible for the real working class, because they have to go to the places where they work. But maybe half of the labor force can work partly or most part of their work, like me, from my home or from my leisure time home where I'm now. And of course, we need good internet connections, and that has been improved by government subsidies and things like that. These type of internet connections can be included in the rent or things like that. But what happened in Finland during the last 10 years, and especially the last 5 years, there has been a lot of market investment, profit-seeking investment on housing, and on their way of seeing affordability has been to squeeze, to minimize the rental housing units, so that, okay, the overall rent can be affordable, but you only get 20 square meters. But you can't organize your life if you have to do work, if you have to study, and things like that. So I think that way is over. People want more space in their homes, and how is that possible without this going to the suburbs and far away? Then we have to invest in collective traffic, as we have been trying to do, the government and the municipalities together. So government is part financing the collective traffic systems, so that there is more space that you can reach the city centers, let's say, in 15 minutes, things like that. Maybe I already said enough, but thank you.
Thank you. That's very, very, very interesting, and we'll indeed come back for the Q&A session. So indeed, a lot of challenges that we see common in many countries, even though you mentioned that Finland has a very efficient welfare state, and that so far the social consequences of COVID has been maintained to, let's say, a reasonable level, if we may say like this. But I'd like to pick up again this question about the contradiction between the different needs and different objectives from the point of view of the residents. And I'd like to take the opportunity now to give the floor to David. David Seam, David, indeed, you are a famous urbanist, architect, and you also say that you're an optimist. It's one of your in your description of what you do and who you are in your agency. So you're an optimist. You're a creative problem solver who believes in the potential of people and places. So I quote, and that must be very challenging to be optimist in a situation post-COVID. You also indeed wrote a famous book called The Soft City. So in a nutshell, where are we now in terms of the soft city, in terms of the aspiration of people? Has COVID-19 in a way killed some of the dreams of soft city and compact city, or can we really recreate something which will be positive for everyone? So I'm happy to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And I do feel a little bit nervous coming after the gravitas of some of the problems that Josh presented, and Jeremy too. And if you see the Soft City book, it looks almost like a children's book, the way it's illustrated. I guess Soft City is kind of like a counterpoint to Smart City, because I felt there were some simpler things. Just to say one thing about the Gale office, after Jan Gale, the famous Danish architect planner, and basically Jan Gale spent his life discovering why some environments make us thrive and some environments kill so much about the joys of life. And very much often when we think about the Gale stuff, it's like people imagine, oh, it's drinking cappuccino on a square in Italy or something. But actually, it's much more banal than that. It's the real everyday life about waiting for the bus and your kids playing and where you throw your trash or where you put your bike, hanging up washing. It's really banal stuff. And I always think about the Swedish architect Ralph Erskine, who said, you can't be a good architect if you don't care about people. So I guess the background is about really caring about people. And there's a lot of stuff we know about. And the book, Soft City, which actually had the working title, The Shit That Works, was more about a lot of very simple, cheap things that work. And that's made my connection, because I'm not a social housing provider, but I'm very interested in the things that are affordable, cheap and simple, but also can give people better lives. And so in terms of like, okay, this cute book, Soft City, that sounds nice. COVID, the convivial, convenient city, public life, well, that's over. You know, I'm getting in my car and driving out to the suburbs. And so everybody commiserated in the book, well, what a shame, that was a very badly timed book, kind of. But actually, for me, I think there's probably three big themes that which are in the book, which I think have become very relevant during and after COVID. The first one is about living locally, about neighbourhood life, and everything we've learned at Gale, because we've studying pre-COVID, during COVID, after COVID. You know, the downtowns, those very commercial environments, they've suffered, but actually we see more neighbourhood life than ever before. Your local park, your local playground have become more used than ever. We're seeing more older people, we're seeing more women, more children out in public space, which seems to be a good thing. And all of those, you know, as you're locked down, if you can, you know, do your shopping, you get your basic needs met locally, that seems to be really important. The second big thing, I guess, is soft mobility. Walking and cycling during COVID became incredibly relevant. And it's partly because it's cheap and accessible. And by people being forced to walk or cycle, they discovered it was doable. People who would have never tried before. I had a wonderful story from a Japanese colleague who couldn't take the metro in Tokyo, and she started walking to work, and she walked like an hour and a quarter to work. And it completely changed her life, because she saw her environment, she saw people, she experienced the weather, so many things in a new way. And actually, she discovered she was like losing weight without going to the gym, just because of this kind of like the healthy everyday life. And I think as we're more spent time indoors, and to be honest, with or without COVID, we spend too much time indoors. The opportunity to spend time outdoors is incredibly important. So living locally, soft mobility, being outside, I think big themes which are probably more relevant than ever. And I guess a big background of where Gale comes from is about healthy, livable cities. And how do you define that? And usually I would say that you could ask a surgeon or a district nurse, what is the foundation of public health? And generally they'll say more or less the same thing. They'll say fresh air, exercise, meet people. It's really basic, just be outside more. Even if you're in New York, the air outside is actually better than the air-conditioned air inside. Now also a lot of the COVID stuff we know is spreading through air conditioning, fresh air. Exercise, you don't need to play basketball, you don't need to join a golf club, just walk to the store. So everything that's in walking distance becomes incredibly relevant. And the third thing for health is just meet people, mental health. And so I think it's asking ourselves what environments allow those things to happen. Fresh air, exercise, meet people. And I guess I feel time and time I come down some very simple things, certain environments. For me, the most optimistic, you asked me about optimism, Julian, the most optimistic moment for me was maybe 1 year ago during COVID, the lockdown in Italy, and all of those balcony concerts when Italians had parts of the balcony. Now, balcony is one of the cheapest piece of infrastructure you can imagine. And it shocks me that we build apartments with that, we don't put a balcony on a small apartment. The small apartment is the one that really needs the balcony, because the balcony, of course, connects you to place. It connects you to planet, the weather, the forces of nature, and it gives you people connection. And so those images of balcony life, but that human scale in building, what it means to have a balcony, which is maybe up to 4 or 5 stories, where you've got contact with the earth. But even the walk-up building, because I think it's Jane Jacobs, she talked about street ballets, you know, like when you negotiate. If you're a Scandinavian, and I'm sure Jarmo, you'll know this too, there's a staircase balcony, which the Finns and the Swedes were doing even before COVID. Because if you hear someone coming on the stair, you can wait and let them pass, and then you can go out. And that was very convenient during COVID, because we had to, like, the elevator was Russian roulette. If you were in a building, the box is, of course, a little box of bacteria, a little box of germs, a little box of disease. And of course, you didn't want to share the elevator with anyone. And there was the whole thing, pressing the button. Will there be somebody there? I'm not getting in with you. And just something as simple as the scale of a walk-up building, a classic walk-up 4 or 5 stories, that performed so well, because and of course I believe very strongly in accessibility for people who really need it, but most of us can walk, and the fact that the staircase could be an environment that we could negotiate with our neighbours. It's important too. Very often the virtual room, people make Facebook groups around their staircase. 8, 10, 12 families. If you've got that kind of number, you can know each other. So you know your neighbours, you know who's there. The lady on the second floor, the granny on the second floor. Yeah, we've not seen her for a few days. Can we help with our shopping? There's a scale of neighbourhood which kind of works. So I think there's something about, we've learned that this very cheap, simple kind of building, balconies, staircases, they can make your city, your social area, your neighbourhood work better. So soft city sounds quite sexy. The shit that works, simple things, inexpensive built elements. I don't even know if I want to use the word architecture, because that sounds too fancy, but just those simple things that allows people to organize themselves, and also things which allow us to build more simpler, affordable buildings. So that would be my first take on it.
Thank you. That's already very, very good. And indeed, you reassure us that indeed the soft city era is not over. On the contrary, it might be actually renewed and refreshed thanks to or because of the pandemic. So you already gave a very interesting angles for the conversation about the role of healthy housing, but not necessarily using high tech, but on the contrary, relying on simple solutions and low tech solutions. So from a practical point of view, indeed, you have, participants may ask questions on the chat, and we will try to pick up that during the Q&A session. So I think now it's a time for me to hand it over to Sorka. Sorka, over to you for the last 2 speakers.
Thanks a lot, Julien. I think already some really valid points coming through, and you mentioned elevator being Russian roulette, but in another sense. So in Janek Tarkowski's movie, we see an elderly man living alone. The elevator breaks. He has a heart attack and is saved by a robot who actually administrates CPR and brings him back to life, and then contacts the robot who was working in his father's office, who then sends a hologram to visit his son and orders a robot to take care of him. So a really dystopian future, Janek, that you show in your movie. So maybe it would be great to hear from you about what inspired you to make that short film as a part of the Union Sociale pour l'Habitat film competition. And so we saw it the first time in 2019 in Lyon in the film festival. What sort of reactions have you been getting from that film when you've shown it to different audiences? And of course, if you have any reflections on how relevant it is now when we rely so much on the digitalization, and this film really shows the limits of those digitalization for what David, you referred to as a basic need to meet people. It sounds easy, but this film actually shows that it's not to be taken for granted. So Janek, please give us a bit of an insight into what inspired you to make this film and some thoughts around that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So what inspired me, it's in my project, I love to study how technology affects our society and our daily lives. And one day I heard about a robotic assistant for people who are in need of help. So in Paris, because I live in France, I met scientists in hospitals who are working now on this kind of robot. So this kind of robots to help all people are existing right now. It's not science fiction. It's existing, so it's present. And I met them to talk about the risks and opportunities of that kind of technology. Because in a way, it's interesting because, for example, it can help all people to do the for example, help them in the daily life to go to the groceries to buy food, and even they can have these robots what are existing now. They can stimulate the people by, for example, they have memory games to stimulate the old people. They have yoga sessions to make them move. So it's in a way it can be interesting, but in another way, we have to take care of because the robot doesn't have to because they said that for some people they send a robot to help their father, for example, but the son don't come to see his father because he have a lot of work. So we have to be cautious because they don't have to replace the human. So the scientists say this kind of robot can be helpful, but a human always need to be there to look after the people, because the robot doesn't understand everything, so it can be dangerous. So that's why I wanted to make this movie, and because I saw at my work we have a lot of emergencies, lot of mails, lot of work, and we are, for example, one time I was working, all was emergency, and I have my parents call me, and I say, oh no, I have no time for them because I am working, I have emergencies. And I said, but my parents are the real priorities in my life. So in our society, we have a lot of stimulations, and we can lose what is very important for us. So it can be our family, our friends. So I wanted to talk about that in this movie. And I made it in the movie was shot in a social housing in France. And I saw that in France, there are a lot of innovation in social housing. It's very interesting because, for example, now some social housing are made by robots, like a big 3D printer. They have made social housing with a robot, so it's cheaper and it can be more affordable after. And I saw for example, in France, there are in some social housing house, there are some shared gardens, so people can create a community. And for me, it was very, I have a strong bond with social housing because when I was a kid, my grandparents who have they lived in Poland during the Second World War, and they have to go away during the war, and they can settle down in France thanks to social housing. And I went there, and there is a strong community of a lot of people from many countries, and we played together in the garden, and it was very interesting for me. So I think right now with the COVID, it's very important to have this kind of community and a mix between generations, because, for example, in France, we have in some place for the lunch, the kids can come to eat with the old people of the house. So it's that kind of initiative are very interesting to mix people and to break the isolation, and it's clear that with the COVID, it changed a lot of things, and people. For example, I made this movie before the COVID,
Yeah, so, I think it's true. I think the pandemic has shown those themes to be even more important. Thanks a lot, Janek, for that background. And I think you also mentioned the simplicity of having just a space to meet, and I think it touches upon what David was saying of how the surroundings also play a part in tackling the issue of loneliness. And I think you did see the future, and this links very well with your film. You tapped into an issue that was that is now coming up more and more. And this is, I think, what Rika is going to tell us a little bit about, because indeed the Danish government identified this very issue of loneliness as being a growing and worrying issue. And indeed, Rika, you're going to tell us a little bit about what the social housing organizations in Denmark are doing around that topic.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, correctly. The Danish government passed a motion in November 2020 that allocated more than 6.5 million euros to different NGOs in Denmark with the purpose of targeting specifically loneliness and general bad state of health among vulnerable citizens during the COVID crisis. And 2 of those millions were allocated directly to BL, where I work, and we passed all the 2 million on to our members so that they could create projects with the purpose of inviting lonely and self-isolated tenants into positive, very local communities. So so the government has had a real focus on this problem. And so now we have in total 89 projects financed all over social housing areas in Denmark that all address this issue. And I can really recognize the points from David's speak, where he talks about going outside, exercising and meeting people. All our 89 projects are all about that. And it just tells us, we didn't tell them that was how they were going to do it, but that just shows us that's what works, and it's pretty simple. We have projects varying from walking groups and chair gymnastics for seniors and cooking events for young people. Biodiversity projects have actually, we see a lot of those where nature is like the common ground where you can meet. So a lot of great projects that really gives us knowledge about how we as a housing sector can work. So we are really focusing on like drawing all the findings from these projects to make us better in the sense of fighting loneliness and different health issues. So we know that loneliness is a great problem, a big problem, and it's not because of COVID. Loneliness has been a big problem even before COVID, but there's no question that COVID has been a magnifying glass on a lot of different kinds of inequality, as you also said in your initial speak, Soka. We see that as well, inequality in health, in economy, and inequality in the general well-being of Danish citizens, and I presume citizens all around the world. And we know now that we have approximately 380,000 grown-ups that experience severe loneliness in Denmark, and we are 6 million people, so it's quite a lot. It's about 8% of the Danish population, and the number is increasing. So we know we're facing a big problem also financially. It's estimated that this problem with loneliness costs about 8.3 billion every year in Denmark. So it's a huge societal and public health issue that we're addressing here. So, and on top of that, we find a great overrepresentation of citizens experiencing severe loneliness in our social housing areas. So more than 6 out of 10 tenants live alone in our areas, and with no partner, no children. And we know that we house tenants in periods of their lives where they are extra vulnerable in regarding to become lonely, like in different, when you face changes in your life, like a divorce, or you're moving away from home, or if you're just vulnerable in general, socially and economically. So we have a lot of the people that are in risk of becoming very lonely living in our housing areas. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what we've learned during the COVID and the money we've been given to explore this field is that we, as a housing provider, we really excel in the sense that we are, of course, we have the frame around the life. David and others have been talking about that. That's given. Of course, we have like a very important voice when it comes to creating livable areas. But also another point that we really have to note is that we are present where people live, and that really means a lot when you have to address loneliness. Other NGOs and other partners, municipalities, they know of the problem, but they are not present where people live. And that's really what we're taking from this COVID period, is that we need to explore this potential. What can we do? How can we use our infrastructure and our knowledge to really help people engage in real and lasting relationships? That's what we know, what we need to create to address the issue of loneliness. Not only an event or go to the cinema once in a while, we need to create long-lasting relationships between people. So that's really what we've learned in this period, that we need to do something here, and we have a unique potential to actually to create change here. Yeah.
Yeah, great point. And I think this need to act, it's been the thread going through the whole of these sessions, because there is this feeling that the issues have come so much to the fore, whether that's the homeless issue that Josh outlined or the loneliness issue, urgency that you outlined. It's really time to act now that we have also this political tailwind behind us. We have a couple of questions coming through actually from people who have joined in, and one is indeed, maybe it could be taken up by Jarmo or David, just generally about this challenge indeed that has been raised by all of you about the livability of our homes and the need for pro-livability renovations. But at the same time, we realize that social housing providers are under that financial pressure. So how to reconcile that? Maybe Jarmo or Josh or indeed David, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, I might jump in and maybe someone else might take the baton from me. No, I think it's a really fair question, and I know Dara Turnbull is working as a deliverer of social housing. I know that budgets can be excruciatingly tight. And though I can say as an architect, yeah, balcony's cheap, but actually everything costs, and when you're kind of just trying to get things to go turn over, any changes can be significant. But I think if we can maybe also start talking about that, like also the value of things, not just the cost, and something like identifying the things which are cheap but do a lot. So I think it's something about. I know there's a tail in the question. One example is adding balconies, which I would argue can be a relatively, depending on the situation, a relatively affordable addition, which can have a very big effect in terms of giving people the feeling of having more living space, and especially in a very, very small dwelling. But maybe it'd be good if one of the providers could also maybe comment on why it's difficult to add a balcony.
Indeed, maybe Jarmo, you would like to come in on that?
I think balconies are no problem in Finland because we have relatively new housing stock, and there in almost all, for instance, social housing, there are always balconies. The question is, for instance, how to get a glass cover balconies so that you can use them around the year, because it's quite cold during the winter time. So that is more important issue in Finland. Of course, the renovation, we are subsidizing the renovation and, for instance, installing elevators if there is not, and things like that, and renovations that improve accessibility or energy efficiency. So I think at the moment we have more mandates to subsidize than our clients are applying for. Of course, it has an impact on the rental level, but I think the subsidy systems on how the government is subsidizing on the demand side, that people can pay their rents. We use a lot of money for that. On the other side, we need both sides to subsidize the supply side and the renovation, and subsidize the demand side. It's another type of mixing systems.
It's a balancing act. I see that Bent has joined us again, and I think he's going to, in a couple of minutes, wrap up the session for us. But there's also another question there coming from Edith Lakatos, and it's in relation to the homelessness issue you outlined, Josh, really worrying there. And of course, you mentioned it's maybe not as extreme in Europe, but we do estimate that 700,000 people do sleep rough on any given night in European cities. And additionally, if the pandemic has shown us anything, it has shown us that we are all in this together, and whether it's a problem, whether it's at the other side of the world or the other side of the road, it's everybody's problem. But Edith is asking specifically about the program Housing First. If that is, she asks if that is a project which has been implemented there.
Yeah, so I think like it's interesting. A lot of times ideas will come out of the US and then they're implemented better in Europe. That's not always the case, but I've seen that happen quite a bit. So Housing Europe is used throughout the US, but it feels very coastal. I see it used quite a bit in New York and Massachusetts. We're using it out here in Oregon and California quite a bit. So we're in the middle of implementing a regional program right now, which is an interesting thing. It's the largest per capita regional investment in homelessness in the United States. In our region, just here, around 2 million people, approved a tax of $250 million per year for the next 10 years to combat homelessness. And so we're standing that program up right now. We're in month 6 of it. And Housing First is a major driver of that. We want to get people inside. They don't have to quit using. They don't have to engage in any type of service. We want to get you inside and then go from there. So yeah, that's a great question. And we're absolutely utilizing Housing First in our design of these programs.
More reason to keep up the exchange. So I'm just wondering if Bent is there. Yes. Hi, Bent. Thanks a lot for joining in. We're keeping you busy these days. Maybe you'd like to give us some wrap-up words.
Yes, and thank you. I was online until recently, and thank you for. I'm very optimistic, and I know you are too. Many of you are too. Of course, there are also some gloomy moments in it right now, but there is also many good signals. As you said, Josh, from the US. You can breathe again and can become optimistic. And of course, there is big issues with the homelessness, but there is also political efforts to tackle it. So it's very good to hear. And David, you are a notorious optimist. So it's good to hear, and you have the the epiphany of your balcony, and I think it's very Gil-like what you are saying here. but what we have experienced, I think, during this pandemic, is living locally, as you said, and the soft mobility. And I have I was missing out a little bit, but I don't know if David has told you about his bicycle, which has changed his life completely. Maybe we can take another session about David's bicycle later on. I don't know, David, will you give it a few words?
No, I mean, it's a little bit funny, but I bought a folding bike. That's my kind of my COVID change of life. And it's kind of like a time machine. It's become this time machine because you can cycle to the station, jump on a train, take the bike with you, they cycle another end. I take it on the train to like other countries. I've taken it to Germany. You can fold up, take in the car. I think this super convenient travel it changed your life. But it's not just about having a bike. I think probably talking about is that by cycling more every day, you get, I mean, apart from the exercise and fresh air, you see stuff and you meet people and you're at eye level and you get all these contacts with your fellow citizens. And I think that's something is the key thing. And I think whether it's a bicycle or a balcony, these simple tools, if you call them, do much more than get us from A to B or give us a place to hang our washing. It's about a bigger connectivity, about being a human being who's connected to other people, connected to the forces of nature, feel that you belong to a place. And I think every time we can find a simple thing, like a simple little detail, which allows us to be connected, you know, and we spend so much time indoors, staying down, with buildings where you can't even open a window. You know, that,
it's kind of crisis also, David, because we have seen this pandemic now, and this has been, of course, a disaster, but many things we have discovered, the resilience of the local society, what we can do in the local society, how we can combine the authorities and what are going on in the local housing associations and the local housing areas, this strength in it, and what Rikke probably told about, I couldn't hear it because I was just rocketed out in the cyberspace, but the loneliness and to combat loneliness and to see how we can tie these strings much more tight together in the local community. And when we do that, we're not only looking, I think, at the local community at combating home loneliness, of course, but also we can move people closer to the labor market, and we can do much more about education. And we also talked about homelessness. So I think as such a crisis as we have discovered here also gives us some positive things to think about, to see that the local societies and the local housing areas, they are much more strong and have much more resilience that we have experienced before. We knew it, but I think it has confirmed what we hoped, some of it. And I think it's a very important lesson. And Janek, your film, there is a kind of dystopia about it, but what you are actually, when I see it, it's my interpretation of it, what you are actually showing here, that the relation between real people in the real life at the real local area is the most important thing of all. And when we look at, when we see what people have said during this session here, I think it's the key elements, and it goes from the local level and also to the bigger society level. And I think that's what makes us happy, and we can see hope, and we can see that it really works, that it do have a really strong power in it, and we have to use that, because if we come out of this crisis as a society and go into the future and we forget what we also have learned in this period, I think that will be disaster number 2 if we do that. So I know the time is running, and we have to return, Jarmo, to Finland and Helsinki, and we will do it. And we have an international housing festival coming up, and we have it next year. We should have had it this year, and we have it next year. And we also have to say that in September, I think it is, this year we have to have participants with projects for Responsible Housing Festival. So we have to submit them already from September this year. And then we have a big festival. And next time, I think we have to see each other in real life. And I think what we also have learned here, we have looked at each other on screens and screens and screens and screens, and we have discovered how much personal relation to look each other in the eyes. That's the most important thing in the relation between people, and I think that has been a good lesson to remember also after the pandemic. So thank you very much, and yes, it has been very inspiring. Thank you very much to everybody, and hope to see you in Helsinki, and maybe sooner too. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And a quick thanks, maybe Diana, Anusha, Abdurrahim would come on board, because I think they've been working like hell to put this film festival together, the first ever.
Yeah.
Don't know if they are there to say.
I couldn't see them, but maybe.
Yes, they're still
Hi, Diana.
It's been a really great idea of Diana so that the momentum of the festival was not lost. To try to do something that wasn't just a conference, but that brought a bit of the daily reality and the very tough reality in some of the films to our screens. So Diana, I hope it was.
Maybe something that I can maybe mention is that it is really hot, but then if you find some cooler time, maybe in the evenings, the films will be still running until tomorrow included on the same platform. So I know that there have been 18 films in total, so that's quite a lot to watch, especially in a working day. But if you have by chance a quiet Friday evening, then I really advise it, because some of them, and actually all of them, are really touching and thought-provoking. So strongly recommended.
And I think Anusha, who's there somewhere, and Abdurrahim have also been
I'm here.
putting it all together.
Great. Abdurrahim, you're muted, actually.
Abdurrahim, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. No, I said that it was a pleasure to work with all the team on this, and to make it successful. So we are happy with the results, and let's wait for Finland.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.
See you
See you next year.
Finland.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Next year. Bye.